She lay face down in the dirt, the taste of iron on her tongue, and for a moment no one moved. Then the laughter came. Low at first, then louder, crueler, spreading like fire through the yard. A boot pressed harder between her shoulder blades, grinding her cheek into the soil until the grit cut her lip open. To them she was nothing. Weak. A liability, something less than the dirt beneath their boots. But the strange part was, she didn't resist. Not yet. She let it happen. Why? Because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. The jeers carried across Fort Phoenix's dusty training yard, echoing off the walls that had seen better soldiers crumble. 38 recruits stood at attention under the punishing morning sun. They watched their sergeant, Marcus Cain, pin a woman into the earth like garbage. Some smirked. Some turned their eyes away. A few shifted uncomfortably, but none stepped forward. Her name was Arya Vale, and if you asked anyone on that field, she didn't belong there. The base was merciless. By day 31, only 38 of the original 95 remained. The rest had been broken down by sleepless nights, fractured by endless marches, and destroyed by psychological games designed to expose the cracks in even the strongest men. Arya, though, she was still standing. Barely. Or maybe not barely at all. Sergeant Cain's voice carried over the field, sharp, jagged, venomous. Attention. The order was pointless. They were already rigid, locked in place by exhaustion and fear. Everyone except Arya. Her posture was just a little too stiff, her stance deliberately awkward, as though she hadn't figured out how to stand like a soldier. But Cain wasn't fooled. He didn't like her, didn't like the way her silence mocked his authority, didn't like that she didn't break the way she was supposed to, and deep down, though he'd never admit it, that unsettled him. He circled her like a predator. Step forward, Recruit Vale. She obeyed, her auburn hair pulled tight in a regulation bun, her uniform loose on her slight frame. She moved with deliberate awkwardness, like a marionette whose strings hadn't been cut right. Every step screamed fragility. But her eyes, empty, purposefully empty. Cain leaned in until his breath hit her cheek. Tell me, Vale, why do you think you belong here? Her voice was steady though quiet. To serve my country, Sergeant. The laugh that came from him wasn't human, it was an executioner's blade. Cold, mocking, sharp. Your country, you think dragging us down is serving your country. You think slowing down an elite unit makes you worthy of the flag. He spun toward the formation, his finger stabbing through the air toward her. Every second we wait for her to catch up, it's a second an enemy would use to kill us all. Weakness is death. And weakness, he jabbed his finger at Arya's chest, looks like this. The recruits' silence was louder than their laughter had been. They weren't about to argue with Cain. Why would they? He had survived tour that haunted him in his sleep. He had the scars to prove it. Arya didn't blink. She let his words wash over her, like waves breaking on stone. But in the silence of her mind, something flickered. A memory. Shadows in a room she once hid in. Men in uniform speaking languages she barely understood. A hand placing a medal into a box. A voice whispering words she never forgot. Strength is not cruelty. Don't let them tell you it is. Her father's voice. She swallowed the memory down, locking it away before it showed on her face. Cain turned back to the formation, packing with theatrical anger. This isn't some equality experiment. The enemy doesn't care if you're a woman. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about quotas. They care about killing weakness. And weakness, he pointed again without looking at her, gets good men buried. Most recruits nodded, some reluctantly, others eagerly. The relief of not being the target was enough to make cruelty look like truth. Only a few, scattered through the group, held their silence with furrowed brows. From the sidelines, a figure watched. Colonel Diana Brooks, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. She shouldn't have been there at this stage, which made her presence curious. Her pen scratched quietly across paper as she studied Arya Vale. The sun climbed higher, blistering the earth, baking sweat into uniforms already stiff from days without proper rest. And then Cain made the announcement they all dreaded. Close quarters combat training. It was the perfect arena for humiliation. The recruits broke into pairs almost instinctively, years of silent hierarchy guiding them. Nobody stepped forward for Arya. They didn't want the embarrassment of being seen with her. Cain's eyes gleamed. "Recruit Torres," he barked. Miguel Torres, a former wrestling champion, a man carved from stone and arrogance, stepped forward with a sneer already curling on his lips. He looked at Arya like she was a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. "You'll be demonstrating with Recruit Vale." The yard went still. Everyone knew what that meant. Cain demonstrated first, showing the technique with practiced precision. A proper takedown, a clean hold. Then he turned to them, his voice carrying cruelty disguised as humor. "Don't worry, women get special treatment in my course. Tor's maximum force. Vale, your job is simple, survive." The recruits chuckled. The stage was set. Colonel Brooks took a slow step closer. The first takedown was brutal. Torres slammed Arya into the dirt with bone-shaking force. Air burst from her lungs. Pain flared across her ribs. She slapped the ground, training reflex, a way to disperse impact, but it didn't help much. Still, she got back up, silent. Cain smirked. Torres went again, harder. This time blood streaked her lip. Her face turned toward the ground as she steadied herself, but her eyes remained calm. Too calm, calculating. For a second, just a flicker, Torres hesitated. Cain barked at him, "Problem, Torres." "No, Sergeant." Torres reset his stance. Colonel Brooks narrowed her eyes. She'd seen it too. That flicker. That other thing hiding inside Arya's stillness. And then Cain stepped in himself. Enough theatrics. He wanted the final humiliation. The recruits closed in, their training forgotten, anticipation heavy in the air. Arya stood in the circle, calm, still, waiting. Cain's voice rose. "Sometimes trash needs to know its place." He grabbed her collar and shoulder, driving her face into the dirt, grinding his knee into her back until her teeth cut into her cheek. Laughter rippled again, though thinner this time. Uneasy. "This is reality," Cain roared. "No mercy, no second chances, no." The words died in his throat. Because something changed. Her fingers twitched, not randomly, not in pain, deliberate. A pattern. A rhythm Brooks recognized instantly, and it sent alarm flashing across her face. "Sergeant," Brooks shouted, "stand down." But it was too late. Arya's body shifted beneath Cain's weight, liquid precision replacing awkward weakness. In less than a heartbeat, she moved, twisted, flipped momentum into advantage. And in 3 seconds, the sergeant was on the ground, gasping, trapped in a chokehold executed with terrifying expertise. The yard froze. Not a sound, not a breath. The weak woman they mocked was gone. In her place was someone else, someone dangerous, someone they should have feared all along. She released him just before unconsciousness took him, letting him crumple, gasping, humiliated in a way no recruit ever could have achieved. Her eyes scanned the yard, no longer vacant, predatory. Colonel Brooks's voice cut through the silence in a language none of the recruits understood. Calm, precise, coded. "Nightshade protocol verified. Status report." Arya answered in flawless accent. "Asset secure. Evaluation complete." The recruits looked on in disbelief as Brooks saluted her. Saluted her. The truth ripped through the silence like thunder. They hadn't been training beside a weak recruit. They had been tested by Major Arya Vale, former Ghost operative, Distinguished Service Cross recipient, their new commanding officer. Everything they thought they knew collapsed in an instant. He was still on his knees, gasping for air, when the silence settled like a heavy fog over the yard. Sergeant Cain, the man they had all feared, the voice that had thundered over them for weeks, was wheezing in the dirt. And she, the woman they had dismissed as nothing, stood above him without breaking a sweat. The recruits stared, eyes wide, unable to process what they had just seen. Who was she? No one dared move, not even Tors, who moments ago had relished throwing her into the ground. Colonel Brooks's words echoed like a verdict. Major Arya Vale, former Ghost Program operative, Distinguished Service Cross recipient, your new commanding officer. The truth stung worse than humiliation, because now they knew the test had never been about push-ups or marches. It had been about them, about who they were when they thought no one important was watching, and most of them had failed. Arya's voice cut through the air, calm and commanding, nothing like the awkward recruit they thought they knew. For the past 31 days I've watched you, not just your tactics, not just your endurance, I've watched your character. Her eyes swept across the formation, making deliberate contact with faces that now burned red with shame. Some of you chose cruelty when you thought cruelty was strength. Some of you mocked, knowing you wouldn't be punished. Some of you were silent. She let that hang in the air like a blade above their heads. And 4 of you proved something different, something rare. The 4 shifted uneasily. They hadn't done much, not really. A quiet gesture, a small defense, but she remembered. She had seen. And now, in front of everyone, their small acts weighed heavier than all the sweat and blood spilled in training. Strength without compassion, Arya said slowly, is nothing but a mask for fear. Power without responsibility isn't leadership, it's poison. Her gaze found Tors. He tried to meet it, but his chest tightened, his bravado collapsing in on itself. For the first time since he joined the course, Miguel Tors felt small. Cain, still unsteady, forced himself upright. Rage burned in his eyes. His pride had been shattered in front of every recruit, and worse, in front of Colonel Brooks. This, he spat, his voice hoarse, this is some kind of setup, you can't. Brooks's voice cut him clean. Sergeant Cain, report to General Stone's office, immediately. His eyes flared with disbelief. You can't do this. I built this program. You don't know what it takes. Arya's voice, soft but razor-sharp, silenced him. It was over the moment you confused sadism for leadership. Cain froze. Her words pierced him deeper than her chokehold had. He turned and stalked away, spitting curses under his breath, but everyone knew it was finished. As the recruits began to disperse, whispers spread like wildfire. Who was she really? What was the ghost program? Had she been watching them the entire time? But Arya Vale didn't indulge them. She dismissed the majority of recruits with a single command, leaving only the 4 she had chosen standing before her. The rest walked away, some furious, some hollow, some shaken to their core. And in the silence of their departure, those 4 remained, confused, uncertain, yet somehow hopeful. Arya turned her back to them, staring at the training yard where she had been humiliated just hours before. Her cheeks still stung, the dirt still clung to her uniform. She raised her chin. The real training begins now. That night, the storm reached the headquarters. General Rebecca Stone sat at the long oak table in her office, the light catching the silver in her hair. Authority radiated from her, not because she demanded it, but because she had carried it for decades. She had endured the same whispers Arya had, the same doubts, the same fight for legitimacy in a world that believed leadership had a gender. Across from her, Arya sat tall, her uniform now perfect, her posture unwavering. No trace of the awkward recruit remained. The program is broken, Arya said flatly. General Stone nodded slowly. That's why you were sent in, to show us the cracks, to see if cruelty had replaced courage, and your report confirms it. Through the window, Cain was visible being escorted to a waiting vehicle. His career, once carved in stone, now shattered. They mistake humiliation for training, Arya continued. They confuse conformity with loyalty. They think strength is found in tearing others down. It's not just broken, General, it's dangerous. Stone studied her, eyes narrowing with thought. And yet 4 of them showed you something else. Arya pushed 4 files forward. Not the loudest, not the strongest, but they carried themselves with integrity. They acted without thinking anyone was watching. Those are the ones you can trust in the dark. Only 4 out of 38. Quality over quantity, always. Stone tapped the file, her gaze still on Arya. 31 days. You endured abuse most couldn't have handled for more than 3. Why didn't you break cover? Arya's jaw tightened, but her voice remained even. With respect, General, I've endured worse, for longer. The General's eyes softened. She tapped a folder at her side, one marked with the highest classification. Yes, I've read. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows creeping across the training grounds. Being underestimated, Arya said finally, can be an advantage. People reveal their true selves when they think you're beneath them, and what I saw out there, her voice grew colder. A culture that rewards the wrong things, strength without wisdom, toughness without compassion, power without restraint. That isn't training, that's breeding monsters. General Stone leaned back, folding her arms. Then we rebuild, from the ground up, and you, Major Vale, you're going to lead it. Dawn came with fire. The training yard stood silent. The recruits assembled once more, but this time their postures were different. Yesterday they had mocked her. Today they stood stiff with unease. Arya walked out in full uniform, decorations glinting against her chest, shoulders squared. Her presence shifted the air itself. No one laughed now. At ease, she commanded, her voice steady. They moved, but cautiously, as though afraid even the smallest motion would betray them. Yesterday was difficult for many of you, Arya began. Her words carried weight, deliberate pauses falling like footsteps in the dirt. Because you learned something most soldiers never do, that your actions when you think no one is watching define you more than any medal. Her eyes scanned the line. Your strength isn't measured by who you can break, it's measured by who you can build. One by one, she called out the 4 who had passed her unspoken test. Recruit Chun, who had defended a teammate when Cain berated him. Recruit Daniels, who had shared scarce water without hesitation. Recruit Alvarez, who put his team ahead of himself. Recruit Lee, who resisted cruelty even when silence would have been safer. They stepped forward, uncertain, hearts pounding. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected recognition for what to them had been nothing but instinct. Arya's voice softened, but only slightly. These 4 understood something most of you forgot. Leadership isn't a privilege. It's a responsibility. She knelt, scooping a handful of dirt from the ground. It sifted through her fingers, carried away by the wind. The ground doesn't care who you are, she said. It doesn't care where you came from. It only asks one question: will you rise when they throw you down? Silence, no laughter, no mocking smiles, only the weight of her words hanging heavy on every chest. Then she straightened, brushing the dirt from her hands. 4 of you will move forward to the qualification course. The rest will be reassigned. This isn't punishment, it's redirection. Some of you may become fine soldiers, but not in special operations. Not yet. For a moment the silence was unbearable. Then, as if on cue, the recruits saluted, even those reassigned, because deep down they knew they had been measured and they had been found wanting. But those 4, their lives had just changed forever. That night Arya sat alone in her quarters, staring at the dirt still caught under her fingernails. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, eyes tired but unbroken. She thought of her father again, the medal in the box, the whispers in the shadows, the lesson he left behind. Strength isn't cruelty, don't let them tell you it is. And as the bass settled into silence, Arya Vale made herself a promise. She would change them. She would change all of it. No matter how long it took. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The first morning with the chosen 4 began not with orders, not with shouting, not with endless punishment drills. It began with silence. Arya stood in the yard before dawn, the sky still painted with deep purples and muted orange. The recruits Chun, Daniels, Alvarez, Lee arrived uncertain, expecting the usual barked instructions, the ritual humiliation they had grown accustomed to under Cain. But she said nothing. She just stood there, watching the sun climb. Minutes stretched. Sweat gathered on their brows, not from exertion, but from the weight of waiting. Finally Arya spoke, soft, calm, "Tell me what you see." The four exchanged nervous glances. Chun was the first to answer. "The sunrise, ma'am." Arya tilted her head. "No, not the sunrise, look closer." Lee squinted toward the horizon. "Visibility, ma'am, a clear line of sight, advantageous for surveillance." "Better," Arya said. Her eyes moved to Alvarez. He hesitated, then answered quietly. "Exposed terrain, good for spotting movement, bad for cover." Arya nodded. "And you, Daniels?" The young recruit frowned, unsure. He saw nothing but empty dirt, sky, and fatigue pressing into his bones, but he forced himself to answer. "Quiet, too quiet." Arya's lips curved just slightly. "Exactly." She turned back to the horizon, her voice steady but edged with something heavier. "Every moment teaches you something if you're willing to see it. The silence before dawn tells you whether you'll survive the day. It tells you if the world is about to wake peacefully, or if you've already missed the sound of danger coming." The recruits shifted, realizing this wasn't going to be training as they knew it. For Arya, it was deliberate. Cain had taught them that strength meant domination. She would show them that strength meant awareness, responsibility, the ability to see beyond what was obvious. "Drop your packs," she ordered. "We move." They did, and she set a pace that startled them, not punishingly fast but precise, not about exhaustion but about rhythm. She didn't run them into the ground for the sake of breaking them. She pushed them into the places where their limits whispered doubts in their ears, then guided them past, showing them that silence could be mastered. By midday the sun bore down like a hammer. Their shirts clung to them with sweat, boots thick with dust. They paused at a narrow ravine where the air was cooler. Arya let them drink, then crouched, drawing a line in the dirt with her finger. "This," she said, "is the difference between life and death. A ravine, a ditch, a shadow on the ground. Cover is rarely obvious, but when you learn to look differently, survival is everywhere." She scanned their faces. Chun's eyes lit with understanding. Daniel scribbled furiously in a notebook. Alvarez nodded with quiet focus, and Lee remained stoic but attentive. But Arya saw something else too, the flicker of doubt in each of them. Not doubt in her, but in themselves. Could they rise to this? Could they carry the weight she was demanding? She remembered that same doubt in her own chest years ago, when she was the one overlooked, underestimated. That familiar burn of needing to prove not just ability, but existence. Her voice softened. "You all think you're here to learn how to fight. You're wrong. You're here to learn why you fight, until you understand that every strike, every shot, every step will mean nothing." Silence, the kind that pressed against their ribs, forcing them to consider words they wanted to avoid. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Daniels was the first to break. "To serve, ma'am, to protect." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight he carried. Alvarez spoke next. "To prove I can be more than just muscle." Chun's answer was quiet. "Because I couldn't stand by while others suffered." Lee hesitated, his jaw tight. "Because I refuse to be powerless again." Arya studied each of them, the truths raw, unpolished. She didn't praise. She didn't condemn. She only nodded. "Good, but remember, your reasons will be tested, and when they are, you'll have nothing left but what you truly believe." Not everyone on base welcomed this change. By the third day, whispers had turned into grumbles. The remaining reassigned recruits carried resentment like weapons. They had endured the same trials, the same bruises, but hadn't been chosen. To them, Arya's leadership felt like betrayal. Miguel Torres was their voice. His pride had been shattered by Arya, and humiliation had festered into something darker. In the barracks, he gathered others with bitterness in his tone. She's not here to train you. She's here to play games. You think she cares about making soldiers? No, she wants to prove a point. She wants to break us down to make herself look strong. Some nodded, eager to latch onto any explanation that made their failure easier to bear. Others stayed silent, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge him. But resentment, like rot, spread quietly. Arya knew it. She could feel the shift in the air, the stares that lingered too long, the silence that carried more venom than words. She didn't confront it directly. Not yet. Instead, she focused on the four. That evening, she gathered them around a dim lantern in the yard. The air was cool, crickets buzzing in the distance. For once, there was no physical drill, no tactics, just conversation. "Tell me," she said, "what did Cain teach you?" Daniels hesitated. "Discipline." Chun frowned. "Obedience." Alvarez muttered, "That fear works." Lee's voice was harder. "That pain is the only language worth speaking." Arya let the words hang. She could see in their faces the way Cain's methods had carved into them, shaping their idea of what a soldier was supposed to be. She leaned forward. "Cain was wrong. Discipline isn't obedience. Fear isn't respect. Pain isn't strength. If you build a team on those things, it will collapse the moment the ground shakes beneath it." Her hand tapped the dirt between them. Strength isn't domination. It's trust. It's restraint. It's knowing when not to pull the trigger, when not to swing, when not to speak. Power without restraint destroys more than it protects. She paused, her eyes distant for a moment. Memories flickered. Faces she had once known, lost to decisions made in haste, orders followed without question. Her voice lowered. "I've lived what happens when power is abused. You won't make that mistake, not under me." The recruits listened, the silence thick with unspoken questions. Who was she really? What had she seen? What had she lost? But Arya didn't answer, not yet. The next morning, she tested them differently. She handed each of them a rifle. No targets, no commands, just weapons in their hands and silence stretching out. "Today," she said, "you will not fire a single shot." Confusion rippled across their faces. "You will carry these all day, but you will not use them. You will learn what it feels like to carry power without the temptation to wield it. To know you can end something with a single pull, but to choose not to. That restraint will weigh more than the rifle itself." And it did. As the day wore on, the weapons grew heavier, not from their actual weight, but from the burden of holding them without release. Their fingers itched, their arms ached, and their patience frayed, but not one disobeyed. By sunset, Arya looked at them, her eyes sharp. "Now you understand. Power is only real if you can control it." That night she returned to her quarters alone. The base was quiet, but her mind was restless. She sat by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the training grounds. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but unyielding. She thought of her father again, of the lessons whispered to her in shadows, of the quiet dignity he had carried until the end. And she wondered, could she really change them? Could she take recruits raised on cruelty and teach them compassion without losing their edge? It wasn't certainty that answered inside her. It was something quieter. Hoping. The kind that lived in silence. The kind that endured. It started small. A glance held too long. A whisper cut short when Arya entered a room. A laugh in the barracks that had no humor in it. Resentment was easy to smell. And on Fort Phoenix, it spread like gasoline waiting for a spark. Miguel Torres was the spark. He couldn't forget the feel of the dirt when she humiliated him. Couldn't forget the sound of laughter when she dropped Cain, the man he had worshipped like a god, like a sack of broken pride. It festered in him. Every night he replayed it, and every morning he woke heavier with rage. "She's not one of us," he told the others, his voice low but laced with venom. "She's an actor, a spy, sent here to trick us, and you're all letting her." Most listened in silence. Some nodded. They didn't need to agree outright. The bitterness in their eyes was answer enough. Arya felt it long before she saw it. She saw it in the stiff backs that turned away too quickly, in the way conversations died when she approached. She let it simmer. She didn't confront it. Not yet. She was focused on the four. Because the four mattered more. That morning she led them into the forested edge of the base, where the light barely touched the ground, and the silence was broken only by insects and distant birds. "Today," she said, "you'll track me." They looked at each other, unsure. Chun raised a cautious hand. "With respect, ma'am, how do we track someone who doesn't want to be found?" Arya's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Exactly." And then she vanished into the trees. The recruits spread out, their boots crunching softly against underbrush, rifles slung tight. They tried to remember lessons from survival training, signs of disturbed ground, broken twigs. But Arya Vale wasn't a woman who left signs. She was a shadow. Hours passed. Frustration mounted. Daniels muttered curses under his breath. Alvarez's jaw clenched tighter with every wrong lead. Chun tried to steady them, but her own eyes darted nervously. Lee was silent, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. By the time the sun dipped low, they were ready to admit defeat. And that's when it happened. A voice calmed too close. "You didn't think like me. You thought like yourselves." They spun, rifles raised, but she was already behind them, leaning against a tree, arms crossed. Her uniform was clean, her breath steady. "You searched like soldiers," she continued. "But soldiers get spotted. Operatives survive by becoming the silence itself. Until you stop thinking like prey or predators, you'll never find me." Her words stung, but in their frustration was a lesson heavier than any drill. That night back at camp, she lit a small fire for them. Its glow flickered across their tired faces. She spoke softly, almost to the flames instead of to them. "Do you know what it means to be invisible? To erase yourself so completely that even those beside you forget you exist?" The fire cracked. The recruits stayed silent. "I lived like that once, a ghost in my own skin. And I'll tell you this, it's not power, it's survival. But survival isn't enough. If you want to lead, if you want to fight for something greater than yourself, you can't stay invisible. You have to be willing to stand when the world tells you to stay down." Her eyes lifted to theirs, each gaze sharp enough to cut. "That's what I'm teaching you, not how to fight, how to be seen and how to make it matter." Daniel swallowed hard. Alvarez looked away, emotion prickling his features. Chun's brow furrowed with thought, and Lee's jaw tightened, the words cutting into wounds he didn't share. But resentment doesn't sleep. The next day, during weapons drills, Torres pushed his limits, not in skill, but in defiance. He slammed his rifle down harder than necessary, his voice carrying just loud enough for others to hear. "This isn't combat, this is a game." Arya ignored it. He stepped closer to Alvarez, sneering. "She's softening you. You were a fighter. Now you sit by campfires talking about feelings." Alvarez's fists curled, but Arya's voice cut sharp. "Stand down, Alvarez." Torres grinned. "See, she doesn't even let you finish your fights. She'll turn you into cowards." Arya finally turned, her eyes locking onto him. Calm, cold. "You mistake cruelty for strength, Torres, again." The air thickened. Recruits nearby froze, watching. Torres smirked, but it was forced now. "And you mistake weakness for leadership." For a moment, the silence screamed louder than any gunfire. Arya didn't flinch. "When the time comes, and it always comes, you'll learn the difference, and I pray it won't cost someone else their life." She dismissed him with a glance, then returned to the fore. But inside she felt the tremor, not of fear, of memory. She remembered men like Torres, men who measured their worth by the pain they caused others, Men who believed they were invincible until reality buried them in silence. She had buried some herself. Her heart tightened, not from pity, but from the weight of knowing where that path ended. Training grew harder. Arya pushed them beyond exhaustion, but not to break them, to bind them. She blindfolded them for navigation exercises, forcing them to rely on each other's voices instead of sight. She sent them into rooms filled with noise and ordered them to find silence together, teaching them how to breathe as one unit. She gave them impossible problems, not to see if they would succeed, but to see if they would refuse to give up. Through every failure, she stayed calm. Through every stumble, she repeated one phrase like a thread stitching them together. Trust the ground, trust each other, rise when you fall. And slowly it worked. Alvarez stopped charging ahead. Daniel stopped doubting every choice. Chun stopped second-guessing her instincts. Even Lee, silent and guarded, began to loosen the chains around his voice. They weren't perfect, but they were learning. On the seventh night, Arya sat alone in her quarters. The base was quiet, though she could still feel the hum of resentment in the air. She poured water into a tin cup and stared at the ripples, her reflection breaking into fragments. Her father's face lived in those fragments, his quiet smile, his voice in the shadows. Sometimes the greatest battles are the ones no one sees. She clenched her jaw. The memory wasn't comfort, it was responsibility. A knock at the door pulled her back. It was Colonel Brooks, clipboard in hand as always. "You've stirred the hornet's nest," Brooks said without preamble. Arya leaned back unimpressed, then let them sting. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "You know resentment can turn dangerous." Arya's eyes sharpened. "I know." Brooks studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "General Stone believes in you. So do I, but don't underestimate anger, Major, especially not from those who have built their pride on cruelty." Arya's lips tightened, but she said nothing. When Brooks left, Arya stared at the rippling water again, and she wondered, was she really teaching them strength, or was she simply painting a target on their backs? The silence gave no answer. And yet in the quiet of the next dawn, as her 4 recruits stood ready, shoulders squared, eyes sharper than they had been a week ago, Arya knew one thing. They were changing. The question was whether the rest of the base would let them, or whether resentment would strike first. It began with something small. A bootlace cut clean through, frayed just enough to snap mid-run. Daniels hit the dirt hard, skin scraped raw, breath knocked out of him. At first, Arya thought it was carelessness. Then she saw the cut, precise, deliberate. Later, Chun's water canteen was filled with sand. Alvarez's locker hinge loosened until it collapsed, nearly crushing his hand. Lee's rifle went missing for half a day, only to reappear with the firing pin removed. Accidents, they called them, missteps, bad luck. But Arya knew better. Resentment had stopped whispering, now it was biting. She didn't confront it publicly. Not yet. She let her 4 recruits feel the sting, the frustration, the weight of being targeted. At night, she gathered them in silence around the fire, their eyes heavy with anger. "It isn't fair," Daniel snapped one evening, fists clenched tight. "They can't stand that we were chosen, so they're trying to break us." "They'll keep pushing until one of us gets hurt," Chun added, her voice quieter but trembling with restrained fury. Lee sat rigid, jaw locked. "Then we push back." Alvarez nodded sharply. "Hit them harder than they hit us." Arya studied their faces. Fire burned in each of them. Pride, anger, the same flames she'd seen destroy entire units before. She let the silence drag until the weight of her pause forced them to meet her gaze. "No," she said at last, calm, icy, unshakable. "That's what they want. They want to prove you're no different than them, that you'll answer cruelty with cruelty, that you'll mistake revenge for strength." Daniels shook his head. "So what? Just take it. Let them keep screwing with us." Arya leaned forward, voice low. Do you think this is the last time in your life someone will try to sabotage you, to humiliate you, to drag you down because you dared to stand? This is the test, not theirs, yours, to rise without sinking to their level. The fire popped. The recruits stared into the flames, the fight in their eyes slowly softening into something harder, sharper, resolve. She leaned back, her voice turning softer. When people show you who they are, believe them. When you show who you are, make it count. The next morning, she set them an impossible task. Each of you will carry 100 pounds of gear across the range, she said. Not as individuals, as one unit. If one of you stumbles, all of you fail. The weight was brutal. The straps cut into shoulders, legs burned, sweat poured. Sabotaged boots, weakened laces, roughened straps, they all made it worse. Tors and the others watched from the shade, their smirks obvious, waiting for failure. But Arya walked beside her four, silent, eyes sharp. Every stumble became a hand offered, every falter became a shoulder taken. Alvarez lifted when Daniels nearly collapsed. Chun steadied Lee when his boot caught uneven ground. And Daniels, gasping for air, refused to let go of Alvarez's pack when the straps tore. By the time they crossed the finish, their bodies were wrecked, but they were still together, still standing. Arya said nothing at first. She just looked at them, four broken silhouettes against the blistering sun, and let silence say what words could not. Then finally she nodded once. That is strength. But the sabotage didn't stop. That night a fire broke out in one of the storage sheds. Supplies burned. Ammunition cracked and popped in the flames. Panic rippled across the base. By the time the blaze was contained, fingers were pointing everywhere. Arya stood in the ash, boots blackened, eyes narrowed. She knew it wasn't an accident, and she knew exactly whose anger had boiled too far. Tors. But without proof, she couldn't drag him down, not yet. Colonel Brooks approached, her uniform streaked with smoke, clipboard nowhere in sight for once. It's escalating, she said, her voice hard. You can't ignore this anymore. Arya kept her eyes on the blackened debris. If I hit back now, I prove them right. I become the tyrant they expect. Brooks's voice dropped. And if you don't, someone could die. Arya didn't answer, because both were true. She returned to her recruits late that night, finding them restless, their eyes burning with the same unspoken question. When do we fight back? Arya sat down heavily, the fatigue of command pressing into her bones. Listen to me. The enemy outside these walls is dangerous enough, but the enemy within, resentment, division, fear, that's how units collapse, that's how people die. Daniel's voice cracked, but what if they never stop? Arya looked at him, really looked at the exhaustion lining his young face, the desperation to be more than just another discarded name. They won't stop, she said softly. Not until you make them irrelevant, not until your strength speaks louder than their noise. She let that sink in, then added quieter still, trust me, I know. And in her mind she wasn't at Fort Phoenix anymore. She was back in another place, another war, another time when cruelty had tried to bury her, faces blurred, voices long gone, but the lesson had stayed. Survival wasn't about silence. It was about dignity that refused to bow. The next day, Arya gave her four a task that rattled them to their core. She led them to the obstacle course, the most brutal stretch of Fort Phoenix, walls like cliffs, mud that swallowed boots, barbed wire low enough to scrape skin raw. But this time she didn't order them through. She told them to lead. The rest of the recruits will follow your command. You will run this course not as soldiers, but as leaders, and how you lead will reveal more than how you finish. The other recruits, many bitter, many still seething, lined up behind them. Tors stood at the back, smirk already waiting. The four looked at each other, uncertain, then forward again. Alvarez took the first step. We move as one, no one left behind. They pushed forward. It was chaos at first. Shouts, struggles, bodies colliding. Some of the bitter ones tried to sabotage the run, slowing pace, dragging their feet, mocking orders. But the four pressed harder. Daniels barked encouragement, Chun pulled others over walls, Alvarez physically lifted those who resisted, Lee stayed steady at the flank. By the time they crawled through the final stretch of mud, every recruit was covered in filth, every uniform torn, and yet somehow they finished together, even Tors. Arya stood at the end, arms crossed, watching, measuring. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, that is leadership, not control, not cruelty, leadership. Some recruits dropped their eyes, ashamed. Others remained stubborn, faces hard. Tors spat mud from his mouth and glared at Arya, silent promise burning in his eyes. This wasn't over. That evening, Arya found herself staring at the horizon, the sun melting into gold across the desert sky. Her four recruits stood nearby, exhausted but proud, quietly tending to bruises and scrapes. Brooks approached again, voice low. You've bought time, but resentment doesn't just fade, Tors won't stop. Arya's eyes stayed on the horizon. I know. And when he pushes too far. Arya's jaw tightened, then he learns. Brooks studied her, searching for cracks in the mask, but Arya didn't flinch. The colonel finally nodded and walked away, leaving Arya alone with her thoughts. She let the silence wrap around her, heavy and unyielding. The memory of fire still clung to her clothes, the echo of sabotage whispering at the edges of her mind. This wasn't just training anymore. This was war within walls. And the cost would come soon. The night it broke open, the air was too still. Even the crickets had gone silent. Arya stood alone near the edge of the training yard, the moonlight painting silver across the dirt. She could feel it coming. The silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that warned you before a storm. She wasn't wrong. By the time the shouting started, she was already moving. Tors had chosen his stage well. The barracks, after lights out, a place where whispers turned into truths, where frustration boiled into courage. His voice carried, louder than it had ever dared before. She's not here to train us. She's here to humiliate us, every one of you, and you're letting her do it. Recruits stirred in their bunks, some sitting up, others lying still but listening. The words fed something raw inside them, resentment, envy, shame. Tors paced like a predator in the dim light. 31 days of hell, and what do we get? 4 chosen, 4. The rest of us discarded like trash. You think she cares about you. She doesn't. She's here to prove she's better, to tear us down. Someone muttered agreement. Another cursed under his breath. Tors pressed harder. We survived the same trials. We bled the same blood, but she says we're not good enough. I say she's the fraud, and I'm done following a fraud. The murmur grew into a growl. And then the door creaked open. Arya stepped inside, calm as a shadow. The room froze. She didn't shout, didn't bark orders. She simply stood in the doorway, her presence enough to suffocate the noise. Tors turned, his grin sharp, perfect timing. Her eyes locked onto his. You've had your say, now you'll listen. The recruits shifted, torn between their sergeant's old ways and the authority standing in front of them now. Arya stepped forward slowly, her boots soft against the wooden floor. You think strength is found in breaking others. You think leadership is domination. You think pain is proof. And all it's done is leave you bitter, weak, and afraid. Tors' jaw flexed. I'm not afraid of you. Arya's voice softened, almost a whisper. You should be. The silence snapped tight around them. Then Tors lunged. It wasn't a fight, it was a demonstration. He swung hard, aiming to humiliate her, to finally reclaim the pride she had stolen. But Arya wasn't there. She moved like water, calm precision against his reckless rage. His fist cut through air, his weight pulling him forward, straight into her control. In 3 fluid motions, he was on the ground, his arm pinned, his face pressed into the floorboards. She didn't choke him. She didn't strike him. She simply held him there, immovable, her calm breathing a counterpoint to his furious gasps. The recruit stared, stunned into silence. "This," Arya said quietly, her voice carrying through the room, "is why cruelty fails. It blinds you. It makes you sloppy. It convinces you that rage is strength. And in the moment that matters, it betrays you." She released him. Tors scrambled up, chest heaving, shame burning in his eyes. He wanted to lunge again, but something in her stillness stopped him. Not fear, not submission, something heavier, respect, though he'd never admit it. Arya turned her gaze on the room. "The choice is yours. Follow him into bitterness or rise above it. But hear me now. The world beyond these walls doesn't care about your pride. It cares whether you can protect the person next to you. And if you can't," her eyes lingered on Tors, "then you don't belong here." The recruit stayed silent. No one moved. Finally, Arya turned and walked out, leaving the weight of her words behind. The next day, tension hung over the yard like smoke. Tors avoided her gaze, his pride shattered twice over. The other recruits kept their distance, unsure which way to lean. But her four, they stood taller, firmer, more united than ever. She led them into the desert that morning, the sun merciless overhead. No shade, no comfort, only endless sand and silence. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is where soldiers break. Not in battle, not in gunfire, here, alone with the weight of silence." She handed each of them a small pack, minimal supplies, barely enough water, no compass. "You'll find your way back together, or you won't find it at all." Then she turned and walked away, leaving them in the vast emptiness. The desert stripped them bare. Every step dragged, every breath burned. The heat clawed at their throats, the sand seared their boots. By midday, Daniel stumbled, his lips cracked. Chun shouldered his pack without hesitation, even though it slowed her. By nightfall, Alvarez's voice grew sharp with frustration, snapping at Lee when he hesitated at a fork in the terrain. Lee's reply was colder, sharper, the tension threatening to split them. But Chun's voice broke through, steady despite exhaustion. "No one's quitting, we move as one." The silence pressed heavy. Then Daniel's, weak but resolute, muttered, "Together." And they kept moving. Hour after hour, step after step. Until finally, just as dawn painted the horizon, they saw the faint outline of Fort Phoenix in the distance. They had made it. Broken, blistered, but unyielding. Arya was waiting. She looked at them, faces burned, bodies wrecked, and her voice softened, the rare hint of warmth in her tone. "You didn't survive the desert. You survived each other." For the first time, a flicker of pride passed across their faces. But Tors wasn't finished. Failure had not humbled him. It had poisoned him deeper. That night, while most slept, he gathered the bitter ones again. His voice was low, dangerous now. "She's breaking us, one by one, turning us against each other. And if we don't stop her now, she'll finish us." The others hesitated, doubt flickering, but Tors pressed harder. "She humiliated Cain. She humiliated me. And she'll humiliate every one of you until nothing's left, unless we end it." The silence that followed was darker than agreement. Arya felt it, even in sleep, the shift in the air. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The storm broke without warning. It was midnight when the alarm sounded, sharp sirens cutting through the still air. Recruits stumbled from bunks, half-dressed, weapons clutched clumsily. Lights blazed across the compound. Shadows ran between buildings, orders barked, chaos swallowing discipline. But it wasn't an outside attack. It was Tors. The storage depot stood in flames again, this time deliberate, controlled to spread faster. Ammunition crates popped like thunder, sparks showering against the night. Figures darted in the chaos, recruits but not on orders. They moved under Tor's direction, striking like an enemy within. Arya reached the yard in seconds, her uniform half-fastened, her hair loose from its bun. but her eyes, sharp, unflinching, saw everything. This wasn't sabotage anymore. It was mutiny. Colonel Brooks rushed to her side. They've armed themselves. We've lost control of half the recruits. Arya's gaze cut through the smoke. No, they've lost control of themselves. And with that she moved. Her 4 recruits, Chun, Daniels, Alvarez, Lee, appeared from the haze, weapons in hand, confusion etched across their faces. "Ma'am," Daniels gasped, "what's happening? Who's attacking?" Arya's voice was steel. "Our own." The words hit them harder than the sirens. Chun swallowed. "Tours." Arya nodded once. "He's turned bitterness into fire, and fire spreads. Listen to me, this is not training anymore. This is a mission, your first. Fail here and it won't just cost you. It will cost everyone on this base." Their faces hardened. "Orders, ma'am?" Alvarez asked. Her answer came without hesitation. "Contain, protect, no unnecessary kills. We are not Cain, we don't destroy our own." They nodded, hearts pounding, fear clawing at the edges but pressed down by the weight of her conviction. The base had split. Some recruits fought fires, others ran blindly, and a corps followed Tors, faces twisted with desperation, weapons loaded. Arya and her 4 moved as one. Near the comm station, they found Tor's men trying to cut lines. Alvarez dropped them fast, his strikes sharp but controlled. Chun covered his flank, disarming one without a shot. Daniels dragged a wounded recruit to cover, his hands steady despite trembling. Lee stood at the rear, his rifle raised, eyes scanning every shadow. The silence between orders was filled with the sound of chaos, fire crackling, boots pounding, voices shouting in confusion. But Arya's voice cut through steady calm. "Breathe, focus. This is not war, it's family lost, treat it as such." And then Tors appeared. Through smoke and fire, his silhouette loomed, rifle slung, jaw set, eyes blazing with the fire he'd lit. "You see," he shouted, voice booming across the yard. "She's not saving us, she's dividing us. She's turning you against your brothers." Arya stepped forward, her boots deliberate, her 4 recruits at her back. "You divided yourself the moment you chose hatred over honor." Tors sneered. "Honor? You humiliated Cain, you humiliated me, and now you humiliate all of us. You think you're better, but you're nothing but a ghost clinging to old wars." Arya's voice stayed calm. "I don't need to be better than you, Tors. I need to be better for them." She nodded toward the recruits caught in the crossfire, faces torn between loyalty and doubt. Her words cut, but not enough. Tors raised his rifle. The air froze. The shot never came. Lee moved first, fast as instinct, knocking Tors' weapon aside before the trigger pulled. The blast cracked harmless into the dirt. In a flash, chaos erupted. Recruits surged, weapons clashed, fists struck. It was no longer training, no longer drills. It was survival. Arya moved like a storm through the chaos. She disarmed, redirected, disabled. She didn't kill. Every strike was measured. Every move carried purpose. Her 4 mirrored her, shaky but determined, their trust in each other sharper than fear. Daniels dragged another recruit from the flames, his arms trembling but unyielding. Chun fought with precision, her eyes steady, her strikes controlled. Alvarez's fury turned into focus, protecting Daniels at every turn. Lee moved like a shadow, intercepting blows before they landed. Together they held. Finally, Tors was on the ground again, not because Arya had put him there, but because his own rage had burned out. His fists were raw, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. He looked up at Arya, broken pride flickering like dying fire. "Finish it," he spat. Arya crouched, her voice low enough only for him. "That's your problem, Tors. You think strength ends things. True strength begins them." She stood, turning to the recruits who had followed him. "Look around you. This is what happens when pride leads. This is what happens when bitterness commands. You fought your own, burned your own home, nearly killed the brothers you swore to protect. If that's the strength you want, leave now." The silence was deafening. One by one, weapons dropped. Recruits lowered their eyes. Even those who had cursed her before could no longer deny the truth. Tor stayed on the ground, broken not by force, but by the weight of his own failure. By dawn the fires were out. The base was scarred, smoke still rising, but it stood. Arya walked through the wreckage with her four at her side. Recruits worked quietly to rebuild, shame heavy in every movement. Colonel Brooks approached, her voice softer than Arya had ever heard. "You saved the base without destroying it." Arya's gaze swept across the yard. "No, they saved themselves. I just showed them what they were destroying." Brooks studied her for a long moment. "And what did it cost you?" Arya's eyes lingered on Tor's, sitting alone, head bowed. His once unshakable pride now nothing but ash. "Everything costs something," she said quietly. That night the base was silent, truly silent. Arya sat with her four recruits under the stars, the weight of the night pressing down. They were bruised, exhausted, shaken, but alive, and something in their eyes had changed. They weren't just recruits anymore. They were soldiers. And for the first time, Arya allowed herself a flicker of something dangerous. Hope. The base smelled of ash for days. Even after the fires were out, even after the debris was cleared, the scent lingered, a reminder of what pride could burn, of what resentment could destroy. The recruits worked in silence, repairing walls, carrying crates, rebuilding what had been torn down. None spoke of the night Tors led them into darkness. But no one forgot it either. Arya walked the grounds each morning, boots crunching against gravel still blackened at the edges. Her four recruits followed her, not because she ordered it, but because their steps had found rhythm with hers. They were bound now, not by command but by choice. She looked at them sometimes when they weren't watching, the bruises still dark on Alvarez's jaw, Chun's knuckles raw from grappling, Daniel's shoulders hunched with exhaustion but never giving in, Lee's eyes sharper now, no longer hiding behind silence. They had walked through fire, and though scarred, they had not burned. Tor sat alone most days. The fight drained out of him, replaced by something heavier. Shame. No one mocked him. No one needed to. The silence was punishment enough. Arya watched him from a distance, remembering the rage in his eyes, the blind fury that almost destroyed them all. She wondered if he would ever understand, if humiliation could one day become humility, or if he would carry bitterness forever, waiting to explode again. Part of her wanted to hate him, part of her wanted to see him gone, but deeper still was the quiet voice that whispered her father's words, "Strength isn't cruelty. Don't let them tell you it is." So she didn't hate him. She pitied him. General Stone arrived 3 days later. The yard fell silent as she walked in, her silver hair catching the light, her presence commanding without needing to raise her voice. She studied the recruits, their uniforms cleaner now, their eyes sharper, their silence more respectful. Then her gaze found Arya. "Report," the general said simply. Arya stood tall, her voice steady. The base was tested, not by outside enemies, from within. Pride nearly tore it apart, but the lesson was learned. Stone's eyes swept across the formation, and who taught it? Arya's gaze flicked briefly to her four, then back to Stone. "They taught themselves. I only showed them the mirror." The general studied her, then the recruits. Finally, she nodded. "So be it. 4 will advance. The rest will be reassigned, and this program, this place, will be rebuilt in your image, Major Vale." A ripple moved through the yard, "rebuilt in her image." The words carried more weight than any metal. That night Arya stood at the edge of the training ground, the stars spread wide above her. The desert stretched endless and quiet, the silence almost comforting now. Her 4 recruits sat nearby, exhausted but awake, watching the flames of a small fire. Daniels broke the silence first, his voice uncertain. "Ma'am, was this what you expected when you came here?" Arya's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Expectation is a dangerous thing, Daniels. I came here to see who you really were when no one was watching, and I saw more than I expected." Chun tilted her head. "More." Arya finally looked at them, her eyes softening just slightly. "Yes, you were thrown down, mocked, tested, and still you rose. That's more than strength, that's dignity." Alvarez shifted, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. "We only did what we had to." Arya shook her head. "No, you did what others refused to. You chose compassion when cruelty was easier. You chose restraint when rage burned hottest. That's what makes you different." Lee's voice was quiet but steady. "And you, ma'am, what did you choose?" Arya looked at the flames, the memory of her father's medal flashing in her mind. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, finally, "I chose to be underestimated, because sometimes that's the only way to see the truth." The recruits fell silent, her words wrapping around them like the night itself. Days turned to weeks, the training shifted. Less shouting, less punishment, more precision, more trust. Arya taught them to fight, yes, but also to heal, to read silence as carefully as maps, to understand that leadership was not about command but about service. Some recruits left quietly, reassigned with heavy hearts. Others stayed, their respect for Arya growing with every passing day. Tors remained but broken. Whether he would rise again or vanish into bitterness was no longer Arya's concern. She had shown him the path. The rest was his choice. Colonel Brooks visited often, her clipboard still in hand, though sometimes she forgot to write. She watched Arya with something close to pride, though her voice never softened enough to admit it. General Stone remained distant, her authority a constant shadow, but even she seemed to trust that Fort Phoenix was changing, brick by brick, recruit by recruit. One evening, as the sun bled red across the desert sky, Arya gathered her four for one last lesson before their next phase. She knelt in the dirt, scooping a handful into her palm. She let it slip through her fingers, slow and deliberate, the grains scattering in the wind. "The ground doesn't care who you are," she said. "It doesn't care if you're strong, weak, man, woman, officer, recruit. It only asks one question: will you rise when you're thrown down?" The silence was heavy, reverent. She let the last of the dirt fall, then brushed her hands clean. "That's what this place has taught you. That's what you'll carry forward. Strength isn't measured in how many you can break. It's measured in how many you refuse to abandon." Their faces held the weight of her words. Daniel's eyes burned with quiet determination. Chun's lips pressed tight, but her shoulders stood straighter. Alvarez's jaw eased, no longer driven by anger but by purpose. Lee gave a small nod, the chains around his silence finally gone. Arya looked at them and for the first time in weeks allowed herself to smile, just faintly. "You're ready." That night, alone in her quarters, Arya opened a small box she kept hidden. Inside lay her father's medal, tarnished but unforgotten. She held it in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. She thought of him, his lessons, his dignity, the quiet strength he carried until his last breath. And she whispered into the silence, "I didn't let them tell me cruelty was strength. I didn't let them bury me in the dirt. I rose, and they rose with me." She placed the medal back into the box, closing it with care. Outside, the desert was silent, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of peace. When dawn came, Fort Phoenix stood ready. The scars remained on the walls, on the recruits, on Arya herself. But scars were not weakness. They were reminders, proof that they had been tested and proof that they had endured. As Arya walked the yard, the recruits snapped to attention, not from fear but from respect. Her four stood at the front, their eyes steady, their pride quiet but unshakable. She let the silence linger, then spoke the words that would carry them forward. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Remember that, carry it, and rise.